Most people think of lakes as calm, quiet places. They picture sunny days and gentle waves lapping at the shore. But the Great Lakes are different. They are not your typical backyard ponds. These 5 massive bodies of water, Superior, Michigan, Huron, Erie, and Ontario, are so vast they feel like oceans. Standing on their shores, you just can't see the other side. They're so large they actually create their own weather systems, generating clouds, rain, and powerful winds. The people who make their living on these lakes know their true nature. They understand that beneath the calm summer surface lies a power that demands respect, a power that can awaken with incredible and sudden fury. The sheer size of the Great Lakes is honestly hard to comprehend. Together, they hold more than 20% of the world's fresh surface water. If you were to spread that water evenly across North America, it would cover the entire continent nearly a meter deep. This immense volume of water gives them an oceanic character. Storms can build up over hundreds of miles of open water, just as they do at sea. The waves, known as fetch, can grow to monstrous heights as they travel across these inland oceans. Sailors on the Great Lakes have long known this truth. They navigate these waters with the same caution and skill as any mariner crossing the Atlantic. The unique geography of the Great Lakes also contributes to their dangerous personality. The lakes are oriented in a way that long, powerful winds can sweep down their entire length. A strong north wind, for example, can blow across the full expanse of Lake Michigan or Lake Huron, building up tremendous energy. This creates waves that are not only tall but also steep and dangerously close together. Unlike the rolling swells of the ocean, the waves on the Great Lakes are often chaotic and unpredictable. For the ships of the early 20th century, these conditions were a constant threat, turning a simple cargo run into a perilous journey. November is a particularly treacherous month on the Great Lakes. The air blowing down from the Canadian Arctic is becoming bitterly cold, but the lake waters are still relatively warm from the summer sun. This stark temperature difference creates a recipe for meteorological chaos. The warm, moist air rising from the lakes collides with the dense, cold air from the north, fueling storms of incredible intensity. These late-season gales are legendary among lake sailors. They bring hurricane-force winds, towering waves, and heavy, blinding snow. It was in this volatile November environment that the stage was set for the deadliest storm the Great Lakes had ever known. In early November of 1913, 2 separate weather systems began to move across the North American continent. Neither one seemed particularly threatening on its own. One was a low-pressure system moving eastward from the plains, a common enough event. The other was a mass of cold air sweeping down from Alberta, Canada. Forecasters at the time saw them and noted them, but they had no reason to predict the catastrophe that was about to unfold. On their own, they were just typical autumn weather patterns. But their paths were set on a collision course directly over the Great Lakes, a place with all the ingredients for a perfect storm. As the 2 systems converged, something extraordinary happened. The warm moisture rising from the lakes acted like fuel, supercharging the storm. The low-pressure system deepened rapidly, its barometric pressure plummeting. This created an incredible atmospheric vacuum, pulling in winds with ferocious power. The storm stalled over the lakes, drawing more and more energy from the water below. It began to take on the characteristics of a tropical hurricane, with a distinct eye and winds that spiraled inward at terrifying speeds. But this was no tropical storm. It was a winter monster, an anomaly of nature that would soon be called the White Hurricane. The power of this new storm was unlike anything seen before. Winds consistently blew at over 60 miles per hour for more than a day, with gusts reaching an estimated 90 miles per hour. These were true hurricane-force winds. They churned the lakes into a boiling cauldron of water. Waves on Lake Huron were reported to be over 35 feet high, tall as a 3-story building. But it wasn't just the wind and waves. The storm brought with it a blinding blizzard. The snow fell so thick and fast that visibility dropped to 0. Captains on their ships could not see the front of their own vessels, let alone any other ships or the distant shoreline. This combination of extreme elements made the storm uniquely deadly. A ship could handle high winds. It might even survive giant waves. But to face both at the same time, while being completely blinded by snow, was a navigator's worst nightmare. The cold was another enemy. Temperatures plunged, and the freezing spray from the waves coated everything in a thick, heavy layer of ice. Masts, smokestacks, and entire superstructures became encased. This added immense weight to the ships, making them top-heavy and unstable in the violent seas. They were trapped in a whiteout, being battered by waves and crushed by ice. In 1913, weather forecasting was a young and imprecise science. There were no satellites, no radar, and no computers to model a storm's path. The U.S. Weather Bureau relied on a network of observation stations scattered across the country. Observers would record temperature, wind speed, and barometric pressure, then transmit their findings via telegraph. Forecasters in central offices would then painstakingly draw this information onto maps by hand. From these crude charts, they would try to predict the weather's next move. It was a slow process that offered only a general and often delayed picture of what was happening. When the storm began to form, the Weather Bureau did issue warnings. On Friday, November 7th, they hoisted storm signal flags at ports all around the lakes. These flags, a system of red and white pennants, were the primary way of communicating with sailors. A red flag with a black square in the center signaled a coming gale. Two of these flags, one above the other, warned of a hurricane. The initial warnings were for a strong but manageable storm. Many captains, eager to get one last profitable trip in before the winter freeze, saw the flags, but decided to take their chances. They had ridden out November gales before. The system's fatal flaw was its inability to predict the storm's explosive intensification. The warnings issued on Friday were for a storm that was already history by Saturday. The storm that actually hit was an entirely new and more powerful beast. The telegraphed updates couldn't keep up with the rapidly changing reality on the water. By the time the Bureau realized the two weather systems were merging into a monster, it was too late. Hundreds of ships, from massive steel freighters to smaller wooden schooners, were already out on the open lakes, far from the safety of any harbor. The sailors were caught completely off guard. They had set out expecting a rough ride, but nothing like the apocalypse that descended upon them. The sky turned a sickening yellowish-gray color before the snow began. The wind didn't just rise, it screamed. Barometers on the ships plunged, a terrifying sign that the storm's core was passing directly over them. They were alone in the blizzard, fighting for control of their vessels against forces they had never imagined possible. The warnings posted on shore were useless now. Their only guide was the compass. Their only hope the strength of their ship and the will of their crew. Among the many ships that challenged the storm was the L.C. Waldo, a 450-foot-long steel freighter. She was a modern vessel for her time, considered strong and seaworthy. On November 6th, her captain John Duddleson checked the weather reports. The forecast called for brisk winds, but nothing his sturdy ship couldn't handle. He made the decision to set out from Lake Superior, loaded with iron ore. The crew settled in for what they expected to be a routine, if choppy, late-season voyage. They trusted their captain and their ship. They had no idea they were sailing directly into the heart of the White Hurricane. The journey started smoothly enough, but by Saturday, the weather began to change dramatically. The wind picked up speed and the waves grew larger and more violent. The sky darkened and the first flakes of snow began to fall, driven sideways by the gale. The L.C. Waldo was now in a full-blown blizzard. Captain Duddleson fought to keep the ship's nose pointed into the waves, the safest way to ride out a storm. But the waves were immense, crashing over the bow and sweeping across the entire length of the deck. Each wave was a sledgehammer blow, testing the integrity of the steel hull. The storm's fury was relentless. A monstrous wave, larger than all the rest, crashed down on the L.C. Waldo. The impact was catastrophic. It tore the pilot house, the ship's command center, completely off the deck, washing it overboard. The captain and the wheelsman were swept away with it. Miraculously, they were thrown back onto the deck by the next wave, bruised and battered but alive. But now the ship was without its steering wheel and its compass. It was effectively blind and helpless, adrift in the raging tempest and at the mercy of the waves. With the ship out of control, it began to turn sideways to the waves, a position known as being in the trough. This is the most dangerous situation for any vessel. Each wave that struck the side of the L.C. Waldo threatened to roll it over completely. The remaining crew, led by the first mate on Scots, struggled under to bower for the Starfstar main drive, described. When the ship was being torn apart around them, the smokestack was ripped away and the cabins were flooded with icy water. In a desperate act, they dropped the anchors, hoping to hold their position. The anchors caught, and the battered ship was slammed hard onto a rocky reef near Manitou Island, grounding it violently. The grounding of the L.C. Waldo was both a disaster and a small miracle. It had saved the ship from capsizing in the open lake, but it left the crew stranded on a half-sunken wreck in the middle of a hurricane. The waves continued to pound the broken vessel, breaking it in two. The 22 men and 2 women on board huddled together in the windlass room, a small space in the forward part of the ship. It was their only shelter from the screaming wind and the sub-zero temperatures. The storm raged around them, and the constant grinding of the hull on the rocks was a terrifying reminder of their precarious situation. Their ordeal was just beginning. Trapped on the reef, they had no food and no way to start a fire, for warmth. The ship's galley had been destroyed. For 2 days and 2 nights, they endured the freezing cold and the relentless noise of the storm. They huddled together for body heat, their clothes soaked and beginning to freeze, solid. Frostbite was a constant danger. They were exhausted, hungry, and terrified, listening to the sound of their ship being slowly beaten to pieces by the waves. They could see the distant shore, but it was miles away, an impossible distance to cross in the churning, icy water. As the storm finally began to lose its power on Monday, the skies cleared enough for their wreck to be spotted. Life-saving crews from nearby stations saw the stranded ship and immediately launched a rescue mission. But the lake was still a treacherous sea of massive waves and floating ice. The first attempts to reach the LC Waldo failed, with the rescue boats being driven back by the violent surf. For the desperate crew on the Waldo, watching the failed rescue attempts was agonizing. Hope seemed to be slipping away with each passing hour they remained trapped on the wreck. Finally, after more than 90 hours of being exposed to the elements, a heroic crew from the Portage Ship Canal life-saving station managed to reach them. In a remarkable feat of seamanship and bravery, the rescuers navigated their small surfboat through the dangerous waves and successfully took all 24 survivors off the frozen wreck. The crew of the LC Waldo was saved, but their ship was a total loss. Their story of survival became a legend, a testament to human endurance against the overwhelming power of nature. But for many others caught in the White Hurricane, there was no rescue and no survival, only a final cold resting place at the bottom of the Great Lakes.